This conference will now be recorded.
So in the last session, we have discussed about the various data types has been given by Apex programming, which should be used to store the data inside the variables. So as part of data types, we have two types of data types given by Apex programming. First one is primitive data types. Second one is subject data types. So as part of primitive, we have discussed about few data types, like we have discussed about the integer data type, Boolean, ID, string, date, time, and the date type. And we have few more data types are also available as part of this primitive data types. Now let me explain. Then we will move forward to that some more concepts. The next data type is long. So what is this long data type? Long data type is used to store the numerical values. Okay, numerical values. Only the integer part values we can able to store, but with some larger size. Why? Because when you go to that integer data type will be allowing us to store the integer values, nothing but only the integer values, not decimal values. Only the integer part values we can able to store. But there is a limitation is available that it is allowing us to store the numerical values, nothing but integer values between the range -2 to the power of 31 to plus 2 to the power of 31 minus 1. This is the range it is allowing us to store the values. But sometimes I want to store some more larger values also. I want to store some more larger values also. Then how can we store some more larger values? I want to store a big value inside this. Then how can we store some more larger values inside this particular variable? For that reason, we are using a data type called as long data type. Long data type will allow us to store the larger integer values. No decimal points here also. Here also no decimal points over there. But we can store a lengthy number, nothing but we can able to store the larger integer values as part of this long data type. So what is the range of this long data type value? We can able to store the value between the range -2 to the power of 63 to plus 2 to the power of 63 minus 1. This is the range. 2 to the power of 63 means what? What is the value over here? Now let me show you. Now 2 to the power of 63. So 2 to the power of 63. Let's see how much a big value it is. So this much of large value we can able to store inside the long variable. Inside the long data type variable, we can store this much of larger values, because when you go to some organizations, they're having so many branches, they're having so many development centers in the different countries, they're generating huge revenue. So the total revenue value may be having more number of digits, some lakhs of crores, some crores of crores also. At that time here, in order to store that much of larger values, we are using the help of long data type. So long data type will allows us to store the larger integer values, okay, which will be having the range between -2 to the power of 63 to plus 2 to the power of 63 minus 1. It won't allow any decimal values, no decimal values, only the numerical values over here, integer part. Now, it allows us to store the larger integer values without any decimal points. Without any decimal points. We can store the values between the range. We can store the values between the range -2 to the power of 63 to plus 2 to the power of 63 minus 1. Now, Whenever we are storing some long data type value, each and every long data type value will occupy 8 bits of memory. Each long data type variable will occupy 8 bits of memory. Each long data type variable will occupy 8 bits of memory. So that whenever if you want to store some larger integer values, we are using the help of long data type. And the next one, decimal data type. So what exactly the decimal data type? Decimal data type allows us to store the numerical values including decimal digits. Including the decimal digits, if you want to store some numerical values, then we have to use the help of decimal data type. Now, so in this case, whenever if you want to store some values, like for example, I want to store the values. Like I want to store the currency value here, like some 150 rupees, some 50 paisa, or 175 rupees, some 20 paisa. Like that, we are storing some numerical values, which is having some decimal digits also. So in this case, whenever if you want to store some numerical values along with the decimal digits, we are using the help of this decimal data type. Okay. So decimal data type allows us to store the numerical values, including the decimal digits also inside this. It allows us to store the numerical values, including the decimal digits inside the variable. Inside the variable, we can able to store the numerical values, including the decimal digits also. Like for example, I'm indicating this. Now, so in this case, whenever we are going to storing this currency value, whenever we are storing some currency value, each and every currency field will be referencing this decimal data type by default. Because when you go to the currency field, upon creating the field, we are selecting the data type called as currency data type. So every currency data type field will be referencing decimal data type, because currency will be having some numerical value which will be having some decimal digits also. Currency means money. So which will be having some rupees and paisa values available. So at that time, in order to store that currency values internally, it is referencing this decimal data type. Each currency field will reference the decimal data type by default. Each currency field will reference the decimal data type by default. Now, the next one, double. So what is this double data type? Double data type allows us to store the numerical values along with the decimal digits also, but more number of decimal digits will be get allowed. Like sometimes, whenever I'm going to storing some value, generally, for example, I'm going to be dividing this number 10 by 3. Generally, what we can do, we are going to be rounding up to 3.34 like this. But sometimes when you go to some pharmaceutical organization, they want exact values. They don't want to round up the value here. They want exact value. Because if the value has been changed, then formula will be getting changed of that medicine. That medicine's formula will be getting changed. So in this case, they need some exact value, like some 3.33333333 like this. They want exact value. When you go to some pi also, so they will be having the value some 3.1412 like that. It will be expecting some exact values over here. That means what? After this decimal digit, we are having more number of values are available. No more number of digits are available after the decimal point. In this case, if you want to store some more number of digits after the decimal point, then we are going to using the double data type. Double data type will allow us to store more number of digits after the decimal point as well. So decimal data type will be allowing up to 2 digits after the decimal point. But if you want to store more number of digits after the decimal point, then we can go with the double data type. Now, it allows us to store the numerical values with a more number of decimal digits. Okay, more number of decimal digits inside the variable. For example, we can able to use these options. In this case, we are going to be using this double data type. So decimal and the double, both the data types will allow us to store the numerical values, including decimal points also. But the decimal data type will allow us to place 2 digits after the decimal point, and the double data type will allow us to place more number of digits after the decimal point. So it depends upon the application requirement, we can use this. Always, all the currency fields, okay, all the currency fields are referencing the decimal data type by default. Every currency field which I'm creating inside the object will reference this decimal data type by default over here. Now, the next one, blob data type. So what do you mean by blob? Blob in the sense binary large objects. Blob in the sense binary large objects. Then what do you mean by binary large objects? Binary in the sense, you know, zeros and ones. Okay, binary format in the sense zeros and ones format. Large object means what here? Large content. Like in some places, we are going to be uploading some images. Like when we as part of our application development, we have uploaded some images. We have added some attachments. Where when you go to that application, for every application, we have given our own image as a logo. Then where we have uploaded this image, that image we have uploaded into the document object. How the document object is storing this image? It will be storing exactly in the same format? No. Whatever the image you are uploading into the document object, that image will be converting into the binary format. That binary format of content will be storing inside the document object. Okay, that already we have discussed in our initial concept. Document is a standard object which will be holding all the static resources. That means whatever the images, whatever the pictures, whatever the documents, whatever the files you are uploading into the Salesforce application, all those information will be storing inside your document object. So whenever I'm going to be uploading some image, whenever I'm uploading a file, whenever I'm uploading a document, whenever I'm uploading an audio file or video file, will the exact content will be storing inside the database column? No. Whatever the data that we are uploading, whatever the file or document or image or picture or audio file or video file, whatever you are uploading, that entire file information will be converting into binary format. That binary format of content will be storing inside the database column. Why? Because if I'm storing the exact information, exact file inside the database, it will occupy more memory. So to avoid such kind of problems, whatever the file is available, that file will be converting into the binary format. So binary format will be occupying very less amount of memory than that binary content we are storing inside that column, inside the table. So that if we can occupy less memory, we can store that files also inside that. So that we can save some space, we can store some more information, we can reduce the burden, we can reduce that, okay, we can improve the application performance also. For that reason here, whatever the images or the files or the attachments you are adding, all this information will be storing in the form of binary format. So if you want to store that kind of binary content, it is using internally a data type called as binary large objects. Large object means what? Which are occupying more memory. If it is an attachment, it is occupying more memory. If it is an image, it is occupying more memory. If it is an audio file, it is occupying more memory. So that large content is available, so that instead of wasting the memory, we are converting this large content into the binary format. That binary format of content we are storing inside the database. So in this case, in order to store, the binary format of the images, pictures, audio files, video files, documents, files, attachments, all this information will be storing inside that column with the help of a data type called as blob data type, binary large objects. Okay, now this data type allows us to store the binary content of images, pictures, audio files, video files, attachments, documents, etc. So whatever the attachments you are adding, whatever the images you are uploading, pictures you are uploading, everything will be converting into binary format. That binary format of content will be storing inside your database object. Now, so now which fields are referencing, which objects are referencing this blob data type? Each and every document object. Okay. Now each document object will reference the blob data type. Each document object will reference the blob data type. Now, the last one, object. There is a data type called as object. So what do you mean by this object data type? Object data type is a generic data type. Generic means common. Common. It's a unique. Suppose, for example, I'm having this integer data type. What kind of values it will store? Only numerical values. I'm having the string data type. It will store what type of values? Only string values. I'm having Boolean data type. It is storing what? True or false. I'm having date data type. It is storing what? Only date. That means what? These are storing the specific type of information. But sometimes I'm collecting some data from the database. Okay, I'm collecting some data from the database. But I don't know which data that particular database will return. Database will be returning some value, I know that. But what value it will return, I don't know. Will it return numerical value? Will it return string value? Will it return an ID value? Will it return a Boolean value or what? I don't know. Which value database will return, I don't know. Then what we can do? How can we decide dynamically at runtime? So now this value should store inside this variable. For that one, we are using the help of data type called as object. Object is a data type. Object is a data type, so which will be used to store any type of information. It will store either numerical value, string value, Boolean value, date value, time value, anything. Only one value. It will store any one of these values. Okay, it will store any one of these values. So in this case, object is a generic data type which allows us to store any type of information inside this. Any type of value we can able to store inside this object data type. Okay. Now. It allows us to store any type of information, any type of value inside the variable. It is a generic data type. It is a generic data type. Now, so it is a generic data type over here. So depends upon the value which you are storing, it is identifying what type of data it is. Based on that, the memory will be getting allocated this way. These are the various types of data types are available as part of your Apex program. We have the various data types. Like we have discussed about the integer data type, decimal, double, long, string, boolean, date, time, date time, ID, block, and object. The various types of data types we have discussed over here. Okay, we have discussed various types of data types which are comes under primitive data types. Okay, now in this case, you can raise a question. When you go to some C programming language, these data types are generally tokens. These are called as tokens, are reserved words, are system defined words. But when coming to the Apex programming, these are classes. This each and every data type is a class. This every data type, integer is a class, decimal is a class, double is a class, long is a class, string is a class, boolean, date, time, date time, ID, block, object. These all are ready-made classes given by Salesforce. These are all our ready-made classes. So when coming to the Apex programming language, each and every primitive data type is nothing but a class. Integer is a class, double is a class, decimal is a class, date is a class, string is a class. Each and every data type is a class. Okay, now. So now sometimes you can raise a question. Sir, where, for example, okay, I am from Java background. So in my Java programming, there is a base class for Java. Base class for Java means what here? For the entire Java programming, what is the base class? Root class. Root class means what? What is the starting class? Okay, what is the starting class which they have developed? Upon developing the Java programming language, what is the first class which they have developed? That is nothing but the base class. So for the Java programming, we have a base class called as a object. For when you come into the .NET programming, also base class is object. For your Apex programming, also the base class is object. That means this whatever the data type we are discussing object, this is a base class. Base class means what? Upon developing the Apex programming language, object is the first class which they have prepared. Object is the first class which they have prepared. So that object is the base class for entire Apex programming. Okay, object is the base class for the entire Apex program. Object is the base class for the Apex program. For the Apex programming, object is a base class. These are the various primitive data types are available as part of your Apex program. Okay. Next. So now we'll see the concept of variables. Now we'll see the concept of variables. Then what do you mean by a variable basically? A variable. What exactly a variable?
Name.
Okay.
Anything that can
Name
store
given to memory location.
memory, anything that can store some value for a certain
Okay,
period of
right.
time.
Okay, right. Now, in this case, say for example, let me explain. For example, I have my system, my desktop or laptop, anything. In my system, I'm having some hard disk. There, I'm having some memory space. Assume that this is the memory space that I have. This is my system's memory space, nothing but hard disk space, which is some 500 GB space, which is some 500 GB space. So this is my system's the hard disk space where it is having some 500 GB of space. Now in this 500 GB of space, I can store so much content. I can store so much content. Now, for example, I'm storing some value inside this. Inside this memory space, I'm storing some value, like as some Ramesh Kumar. This is the value which I have stored. I have stored the value some Ramesh Kumar. So whenever I'm storing this value inside this 500 GB of memory space, then will it be having some starting memory address, right? It is having some starting memory address, right, from where it has been started to store the values. So it is having some starting memory address. So the memory addresses will be representing in the form of what? In the form of hexadecimal format. Memory addresses will be representing in the form of hexadecimal format. Now, for example, assume that, so whenever I'm storing this value Ramesh Kumar inside this memory space, now starting address is like, for example, some 0x, okay, 11, okay, x1, 0x. Assume that this is the starting memory address over here. This is the location of this address where exactly the value Ramesh Kumar has been stored. Now, in this case, so now this is the it is having the value like as a 0x11x10x because this is purely in the hexadecimal format. Hexadecimal values will be always starting from 0x. Hexadecimal values are always starting from 0x. So in this case, so whatever the name Ramesh Kumar I have stored inside my 500 GB of hard disk space, so now that my value has been stored inside the location with the starting memory address with the 0x11x10x. Now, so now here, whenever if you want to get this value, okay, if you want to get this value, then we should be aware of this address. Okay, if you want to get this value Ramesh Kumar, you should be aware of this address. Then only we can able to get the value. Based on the address only, we can able to get that value. Now, so now tell me, will you able to remember this particular memory address? Will you able to remember this? Will you recollect this memory address always? No. Why? Because yes, we don't have that much of memory in our brain. God has introduced a small chip. God has introduced a small memory chip in our mind, so we don't have much memory inside that. So we can't store more information. I can't remember this memory address always because I'm unable to remember my bank account PIN number itself. I'm unable to remember the bank account PIN number itself, which is a 4-digit number I can't remember. Then how can we remember this much of complex number? It will be very difficult for me. Now, we can raise the question, sir, I will by heart this memory address and I will remember this one. Okay, fine, no problem. So you can by heart this one based on this particular memory address, we can able to get the value. Suppose, for example, not only one value, I have stored some more values also. Like, for example, I'm storing the value like as some Hyderabad. I'm storing the value with the name some Hyderabad. I'm storing the value with the name like as some sales manager in different locations. I've stored the value with the name like as some 15,000. These are the values which I have stored inside my memory location. In my 500 GB of hard disk, we have stored these kind of information. Ramesh Kumar, Hyderabad, sales manager, and the 15,000. These are the values which I have stored. So each and every value will be having its own starting memory address. For the Hyderabad, it is having the starting memory address like as 0x. So now 1100x1. This is the memory address. For the sales manager, the memory address is 0x. So 1100x1. And for the value 15,000, it is having the memory address 0x11, okay, double x 1x. These are the values are available. So we have stored these values, and then each and every value has been stored in different locations, and then every location will be having its own starting memory address. Now tell me, can you remember all these memory addresses now? Will you able to remember? No. If it is one, that means if it is one memory address, then I will by heart that one, I can remember. If it is multiple, I can't remember. I can't recollect that. That is very difficult to remember here. In this case, instead of remembering this particular memory addresses, for this one, I want to give a reference name. For that one, I would like to give a reference name over here. For this memory address, I'm giving a reference name. For each and every memory address, I would like to give a reference name over here. For that one, we can able to recognize this. So now here I'm giving that remember memory address names like this, reference names like this. Here I'm indicating like as customer name. I'm giving the reference name like as customer name. Here I'm giving that name like as location. I'm giving that reference name like as location. Here I'm giving the reference name like as designation. Here I'm giving that location like as balance amount. So now here in this case, what happened? We are going to be giving some reference names over here for each and every starting memory address. Now, so now here in this case, so instead of storing that, instead of remembering that values, okay, by using this memory addresses, I would like to use some meaningful names. I'm giving some meaningful names like as customer name, location, designation, balance. Now tell me, remembering the names is easy or remembering this memory address is easy? Remembering the memory address is very, very difficult. I can't remember these memory addresses here. For that one, what I'm doing here, for this memory address, I'm giving a meaningful reference name. These reference names are called as, okay? These reference names are called as, these reference names are called as variables. These are called as variables. Variables. So what do you mean by variable? Variable is nothing but a name which has been given to a memory location in order to identify a value, in order to locate a value, in order to store a value. In order to store a value, we are going to be giving a reference name that is called as variable. Like for example, general concept. For example, today I have received a call from a new number. I have received a call from a new number. So I have received the call, and then that number is belongs to one of my childhood friends number. I don't have his number. Just now I got the call from this person first time. He's my childhood friend. So I have received that call, and then we had the discussion over here for a half an hour. And after that, he told me, "This is my new contact number. Please save inside your mobile." Now tell me, will you able to remember that number here? No. Then how we are doing what? How can we remember that? By saving that number. How? By giving a name, like as some Ramesh Kumar. I'm saving that contact number inside my mobile by giving a reference name. Because whenever if you want that number to make a call, use this reference name, like as Ramesh Kumar. Search based on Ramesh Kumar, get that number, make a call, and you can have the discussion. That means what? When coming to the variable, variable is nothing but a reference name. Variable is nothing but a name which has been allocated to a memory location in order to locate a value. Okay. In order to locate a value, we are going to be allocating this reference name for that memory location that is called as variable. Then why we are using the variables? Variables are used to store the values temporarily for some time. Variables are used to store the values temporarily for some time. These are not permanent storage. Permanent storage in the sense only one location, that is database. Permanent storage in the sense only one location, that is database. So during the application execution, if you want to store the value temporarily for some time, then we have to use the help of that variable. So with the help of the variables, we can able to store the values inside this memory locations. So in this case, whenever if you want to store the values temporarily inside your application for some time, we are using the help of variables. Now, let me give the third point here. When you come to the variable is nothing but a name to be get allocated for the memory location to locate the value. In order to locate the value, whatever the memory location is available, that memory address we can able to store, we can identify with the help of a reference name that is called as variable. Now, variables are used to store the values temporarily inside the application during the execution. Whenever we are going to be executing the application, to store the values temporarily for some time, we are using the help of variables. Now, how many variables we can define? We can define n number of variables also. We can define n number of variables inside the application. We can define one or more variables. One or more variables inside the application. So we can define one or more number of variables inside an application. Then how can we define the variables inside your Apex programming? What is the syntax? Okay, how can we define the variable and then how can we assign the value? Now let's say practically in this case. Now the syntax. So what exactly the syntax to define a variable inside your application? Now let me explain practically in this case. Now, syntax says we can specify the access specifier. We can specify the data type. We can specify the variable name. And optionally, we can specify the value also. That already told you each and every Apex statement, nothing but each and every statement in Apex programming should be ends with a semicolon, so that I'm indicating the semicolon. This is the syntax. In this one, something I have specified in the square braces. What are the things I have specified in the square braces? These are optional. Okay, these are optional. That is not mandatory. You may use, you may not use. What are the things that I have specified inside the square braces? These are purely optional. Now, so this access specifier is a further concept we'll see later. Now, we have to specify the data type. You know what type of data types are available. Each and every data type functionality, you know. We can give the variable name. Okay, you can give the variable name. What is the name that you want to use to define the variable? And the value, if you want to assign some value, then optionally we can assign the values also for that variable. Okay, for that variable, we can assign the value. Then how can we define these variables? Now let me explain. I want to store the customer code. Customer code is of type numerical. Then what we can do, we have to define the variable integer. Access specifier, forget about access specifier because this is not required right now. So we have to specify the data type first. What type of value you are storing in the customer code variable? Integer type. So that I'm indicating the data type as integer. So what is the variable name? We can give the variable name as customer code. Customer code. So this is the variable which I have defined over here. Okay, this is a variable which I have defined. Integer customer code. So customer code is a variable, okay, which has been defined by the user, okay, which is of type integer, which can store some numerical values without any decimal points. So now in this case, what this statement will indicate over here, now this statement is informing to the Apex programming language, it is informing to the Apex compiler that the user has defined a variable which is with the name customer code. This is of type integer. So now integer is what? Occupying how much memory? 4 bytes. So please reserve the 4 bytes of memory and find that memory address to this particular variable. This is the meaning of this statement. Okay, this is the meaning of this statement over there. Now, in this case, whenever I'm defining a variable over here, so whenever I'm defining a variable, suppose for example, let me explain. Suppose for example, I'm defining a variable. I'm defining a variable integer, some customer code. So now semicolon. Whenever I'm going to be defining the variable with the name customer code, which is of type integer, then immediately this statement will informing to the affix compiler that user has defined a variable with the name customer code, which is of type integer. So please reserve some amount of memory. How much memory will be reserved? 4 bytes. Why? Each and every integer variable will occupy 4 bytes of memory. So it is going to be reserving 4 bytes of memory. It will reserve 4 bytes. We have 4 bytes of memories available. So now once the memory has been getting reserved, now this memory will be pointing to this particular variable. This memory will be pointing to the variable customer code. Then what is the value will be storing inside this 4 bytes of memory? By default, it is storing the default value as null. It will be storing the default value as null. This is the internal concept will happen if I'm writing this 2 words integer customer. Okay, if I'm writing this 2 words, then internally this much of operations will be happening by Salesforce. So whenever I'm defining the variable by using that word integer customer code, then this way statement will be informing to the text compiler. Today user has defined a variable with the name customer code, which is of type integer. So please reserve the 4 bytes of memory for this variable, and then find that memory address to that variable here and store the default value as null. This is the internal concept of Apex programming. This much of processing will be happening behind the screen. So whenever I'm defining the variable, the respective memory will be getting allocated, and by default it will be storing the default value as null. Nothing will be storing inside that value variable. Like the similar way here, we can define some more variables also. Now I'm defining some more variables. I want to store the customer name. Customer name is what? Character. So that I'm using the data type called as string. String customer name. I want to store the address of the customer. Address contains what? Characters, right? So that I'm using string. Customer address. I want to store the balance amount of the customer. Balance amount means what? Money. Money in the sense currency. Currency referencing which data type? Decimal. That already we have discussed today. Currency is data. Currency is going to referencing, okay, the decimal data type. So each and every currency field will reference the decimal data type by default. Balance. Okay, balance. So in this case, this is the variable name. Okay, this is the variable name. Upon giving the variable name, don't give any spaces. Don't give any spaces. Please give a meaningful name. Some people will be having some habit like as integer X, integer Y, string Z, like that. The people are defining with single character. Don't define like that. When you go to the real-time implementations, we have to follow some coding standards. We have to follow some naming conventions. So based on that coding standards only, we can able to write that code. We can able to implement the functionality. So whenever you are defining the variable, please give a meaningful name, not like as X, Y, Z, like as a single characters. So now here for that reason here, upon defining the variable itself, please give a meaningful name. But in that name, don't give any spaces. Okay, don't give any spaces. It will be like as a single word. Okay? It should be like as a single word. That is a fundamental principle. Now, I want to store the data birth of the customer. So for that one, date. I'm giving the variable name as birth date. Whether the customer is active or not, I would like to know. So that I'm using Boolean data type. He is active or not. Like that, we are going to store defining these variables. This is the way we are going to defining the variables inside our Apex programming language. So upon defining the variables, we are going to be specifying the data type and the variable name. So depends upon the data type, the respective memory will be getting allocated, and then in that memory it will be storing the default value as null. It will be storing the default value as null. Now, in this case, so you can raise a question. Sir, for example, here we have defined two variables of type string. One is customer name, second one is customer address. Can I define multiple variables? That means instead of writing this 2 lines of code, can I reduce it into single line? Yes, there is a possibility. So that means what? We can define multiple variables in a single line also. Now, I'm indicating this. We can define the multiple variables in a single line as given. How to define here now? Let me explain. I want to store the customer code. That is a numerical. I want to store customer age also. What is the age of the customer? Whether he is having some 25 years age, 30 years, 40 years, or what? Both are numerical, right? So in this case here, we can define integer. We can specify the customer code, comma, age. That means define the multiple variables in one shot. Don't define each and every variable separately. Define the multiple variables also in a single line. Also, the possibility is available just by giving a comma. Just by giving a comma, we can able to segregate that variable. So it is informing to the Apex compiler. So the user has defined the two variables, customer code and the age. Both will be of type numerical. That means integer. Now, I want to define string customer name, comma address, comma designation. Like that, here I'm going to indicate this. I'm defining the three variables here: customer name and the address and the designation. Three variables I'm defining, all will be of type string. Next, I'm defining two more variables: decimal, balance amount, comma loan amount. I'm defining two more variables: balance amount, loan amount. Both will be of type decimal, because balance amount means what? Money. Loan amount also money. So we are differentiating with the help of decimal data type. I'm using date data type here to define the variable like as some birth date and the joining date, relieving date. Okay, relieving date. Like that, multiple variables have indicated defined in one shot. That means what? Not only defining each and every variable separately. Here I have defined each and every variable separately to store that values. To store the customer code value, I have defined a variable. To store the customer name value, I have defined this variable. To store the customer address, I'm defining this variable. To store the balance amount, I'm defining like this variable. So that here we are defining different variables. But here we have defined two variables with the same data type. So instead of writing this 2 lines of code, we can reduce it to a single line itself. So that we can reduce the number of lines of code. So that we can reduce the number of lines of code. So always write the optimized code in Apex programming. Don't write your blind code. Don't write the blind logics. Always write that optimized code. Please follow the logic. Based on that logic, you have to implement the code by using some less number of characters, less number of lines of code. Why? Because if the number of lines are less, if the number of characters are less, for the compilation, it will take less time. For the execution, it will take less time, so that we can improve the application performance. So now here in this case, we are going to be using the help of optimization techniques. Now, In this case, whenever we are defining the variables, what value it is storing by default? Null value. Okay, null value. I'm giving the notepad. So upon defining the variables, if the user did not assign any value, then Apex will store the value. Apex will store the value as null. Apex will store the value as null inside the variable. Inside the variable, Apex will be storing the value as null. Please remember this point over here. This is very, very important. If the user did not assign any value for the variable, then by default, Apex programming will be storing the default value as null. Then, so now here in this case, I've defined the variable here, customer code. It is storing the default value as null. Then how to store some my value? I want to store customer code here. How to store this value? For that one here, we have to assign the value here. Assigning the values. How to assign the values? Once the variable has been defined, then we can assign the value for the variable. Okay. Now, so once the variable has been defined with a specific name, then we can store the value inside the variable as below. We can assign, we can store the value. What is the syntax here? We can specify the variable name and equals to value. That means here, first of all, we are defining the variable, then we are assigning the value for this variable. How can we assign? Now let me explain. I'm indicating like as customer code equals to 100,001. You can assign any value over here. Age, I'm giving the value some 34. Customer name, I'm indicating the customer name here. So what is the customer name? Like as some Pawan Kumar. So how can we inform that here? So now we have to enclose this string values in single quote. That already we have given yesterday. Each and every string value, each and every character value should be enclosed with single quote. And then I'm indicating address. Address equals to some flat number 412, some Satya Sai apartments, some Hyderabad. Like that, we can able to store the address. I'm indicating that. Balance amount equals to like some 12,500 rupees, okay, 50 paisa. Okay, balance amount is 12,500 rupees 50 paisa. Like that, here we can able to assign the value for this variable. Okay, we can assign the value for that variable. This is one way. Okay, this is one way in order to assign the value for this variables. Now, so now here you can raise a question. Sir, here I'm defining the variable here. Here I'm defining the variable. Here I'm assigning the values. So will it be having the 2 lines of code? Do we have any chance to optimize this? Do we have any chance to optimize this case? Yes, there is an optimization here. Now, in this case, here, instead of defining the variables and assigning the values separately, in a single statement also we can do that. Same thing we can do in a single statement also. Let me do the note down. We can define the variable and initialize the value for the variable in a single line as below. We can define the variable and we can initialize the value for the variable in a single line as below. How I'm indicating that? I want to store some products information. like some integer product code. So generally we're defining the variable like this. So now I want to assign the value also, like as my product code is some 4000012. This is my product code. So that means what? I have defined the variable and then I have assigned the values also, both. That means both we can do in one shot with the help of this statement here. So both also we can make it separate, both also we can make it combined in one line also. That facility is available. And then string product name. String product name. I'm giving like some laptop device. Laptop device. And I'm indicating both. Decimal unit price. I'm indicating some 35,000. Now, Boolean is in stock. Whether the product is available in stock or not, yes, nothing but true. I'm indicating this value. Like that here, upon defining the variable itself, we can able to assign the value for those variables also. Okay, we can assign the value for those variables also, okay, in one shot itself. So no need to define the variable separately, no need to assign the value for the variable separately. Both we can able to do in one shot itself with the help of this syntax over here. So that here always we have to follow these kind of optimization techniques. We have to reduce the number of lines of code so that we can improve the application performance also. Okay, so this is how we are going to be dealing with variables. So variable is what? Variable is nothing but a name, but for the memory location in order to store the value temporarily for some time. We can define n number of variables also. Upon defining the variables, we can assign some values also. Here the facility is available. So while defining the variable, we have to give the respective data type also. That means what type of data that variable can hold inside this. Okay, this is the concept of variables.
Sir, can you show an example with access specifier? How do we use that?
Yeah, we'll see that because the access specifier concept is comes under OOPS concept, object-oriented programming. There I will show you what exactly that access specified, what access specifiers are available in Apex programming language, how to use them. We'll see practically during the object-oriented programming concept.
Okay, and one more question. So while assigning values while defining the variable, can we do it multiple, like string product name is equal to laptop at the same time?
No, no.
Customer.
So we can't assign the value for the multiple variables in one shot. Okay, we can assign the value for only for one variable in one shot in one line. If you want to assign the value for another variable, we have to go to the next line. That is a syntax followed by Apex program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The next one is we are having the apparatus concept. We'll see this apparatus concept in tomorrow's session. Tomorrow I am going to be discussing about apparatus concept. What are the various operators are available in Apex programming language, and then we'll see the concept of output statements. This is also called as printing statements, and then we'll see the concept of ways to create or ways to write the Apex programming code. How many ways are there in Salesforce to write the Apex code, and how many ways to execute the Apex code? How many ways are available in order to execute the Apex programming code? We'll see practically, in tomorrow's session. From there, we'll see the practical part one by one, how to develop the small logics, and slowly we'll make the things complex so that you can understand. Okay. But the syntax is very, very important. Follow the syntax.
Tomorrow will be
tomorrow we'll be having the session at the same time.
No, you speak. Okay.
Okay. Now.
Tomorrow is Friday.